better known today as the Independence Hall. It was, as I said, the largest public building in America. And it is in this room on the left, on the first floor, where delegates from 13 colonies came to discuss how we were going to respond to the King's ignoring the olive branch petition. The questions were, do you fight a war and then declare independence? Do you declare independence and then fight a war? Do you establish a government first? How does this all work? Because no one had done this before. So finally, after debating from about May or July of 1775 until July of 1776, this debate is going on. The first thing that they do is they create a united army. Up until this point, every colony had its own militia, but now they need a national army. And the second thing they do is they need to appoint a commander-in-chief. And it's not a coincidence that George Washington shows up at that meeting dressed in a brand new military uniform, just in case you didn't get the hint that he wanted the job. So in July of 1775, he immediately goes to Boston, Massachusetts, which is where the British troops are already landing. And we're debating, and finally in May and June of 1776, a committee is formed of 5 men to devise a document that will explain why we want to declare our independence from the King. The 3 most important composers of that document were Thomas Jefferson, but also John Adams and Benjamin Franklin. Happy New Year. They bring this document to this room on June the 28th, and they debate it back and forth. And finally, after making 40 changes to it, on July the 2nd, 1776, John Hancock asked for a show of hands, who is in favor of declaring our independence from the King of England? And everyone raises their hand. John Adams goes back to his room down on 2nd Street, and he writes a letter to his wife that night that July the 2nd will be the day when we will celebrate our independence from that tyrant. And there will be parades and fireworks, and we'll have cheesesteaks and soda pop and pretzels. 2 days later, it took 2 more days for the Congress to actually adopt and ratify the document, and for John Hancock to actually sign it. So that is why we celebrate the signing of the Declaration of Independence on the 4th of July. John Hancock was never able to wrap his head around why it took 2 more days. I guess he didn't want his cheesesteaks to get cold. Now we're engaged in a war. Franklin, after he signs the Declaration, has gone to Paris. I'm going to let this bell ring. This is the centennial bell. It's been ringing here since 1876. Someone once asked me on the tour, does that bell ring 24 hours in a day? And a couple who are staying in this hotel here said, yes, it rings at 1 a.m. and 2 a.m. and 3 a.m. and 4 a.m. So we are fighting this war, and we need to devise a government. So what we create are the Articles of Confederation. The Articles of Confederation require that all 13 now states, no longer colonies, must agree on anything that needs to be agreed upon. But each state is allowed to be its own entity. to have its own militia, its own foreign policy, its own trade arrangements, its own governing laws, etc. And once the war is over, while the Articles have functioned okay up until that point, now it's beginning to unwind. Georgia, in the absence of a foreign policy, is about to declare war on Spain, one of the most powerful nations on earth, because they have a border dispute with Florida. And they say to the other 12 states, it's our foreign policy, not yours. If you don't want to fight the war, it's okay with us, we're going to war. New York is charging New Jersey farmers import duties to bring their produce, their tomatoes and the corn across the Hudson River to sell in Manhattan markets, because New York has its own trade policy and it's different from New Jersey's. Rhode Island is printing its own money, but it's worthless. But if you want to do business in Rhode Island, you have to use Rhode Island currency. So finally, in 1787, 12 of the states decide that they have to come together to discuss how to fix the Articles of Confederation. And so they decide that they'll come to the most important city in America. And they meet here once again. And this is what we call the Constitutional Convention. And in 1787, they throw away the Articles of Confederation and they make the Constitution instead. The only state that did not show up for the Constitutional Convention was Rhode Island. And I think it's because no one would accept their worthless money for car fare. Up until this point in our country's history, the capital of the country is wherever Congress is meeting. And so Congress mostly meets in Philadelphia, but it also has met in Annapolis, Maryland, and Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and Princeton, New Jersey, and New York City. And now it's determined that we should have our own permanent geographical capital. And because of the esteem with which Washington was admired, he was allowed to make the choice, where should the capital be located? And so it's not a coincidence that it's about 10 miles up the Potomac River from his plantation in Mount Vernon. I guess he wanted a short commute to work. Literally, and this is not a political statement, Washington is located on swampland. And so they recognized that it would take about 10 years to drain the swamp and to build the permanent capital. And so for those 10 years, between 1790 and 1800, Philadelphia was the official capital of the country of the United States. You know that we have a three-part government. The first part, the judiciary, met here on the corner building, Old City Hall. You do not need an advance ticket to go in there. On this corner here is Congress Hall. And on the first floor is where the House of Representatives met. On the second floor is where the Senate met. And as important as the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence that were made in this building here, another activity occurred in Congress Hall. Because in 1797, Washington, having served 2 4-year terms as President of the United States, had the power passed between him and John Adams, the second President of the United States. There was no rioting in the streets, there was no coup d'etat, there was no foreign invasion. Power passed in a civilized and dignified manner in this building here in 1797. So at the beginning of this tour, when I told you that I would show you the factories where we made our country, these are the factory buildings. In this room here, the Declaration of Independence, that all men are created equal, and the Constitution, we the people will govern ourselves. We've eradicated that idea that God anoints the king. From now on, power passes from the bottom up, from the population, from we the people. And then, every 4 years, we get to change our leaders, and that happened there for the first time. These are the factory buildings where we made America. Now, unless you've got some questions, let's go see about some Broken Bell.
Oh, yeah.
Ready?
Yeah.
Yeah.